Everyone told me my new penthouse in Harbor Point was a trophy, but to me, it was a lockbox. I thought thick walls would finally keep my family's chaos at bay. Then my parents arrived with my sister's suitcases and a smile that screamed family obligation, assuming I would fold. They didn't realize that while they were planning an invasion, I had been quietly engineering a trap built specifically for them. The ink was barely dry on the closing documents when I felt the first true breath of oxygen hit my lungs in 33 years. I sat across from the title agent in a glass-walled office that overlooked the sprawling gray water of the bay, my hand resting on the heavy black pen I had used to sign my name roughly 50 times. The stack of papers in front of me represented the entirety of my savings, a decade of 70-hour work weeks, and a level of financial discipline that bordered on pathological. "Congratulations, Ms. Foster," the agent said, sliding a heavy brass key across the mahogany table. "It is officially yours. The penthouse at Harbor Point is a magnificent property." I picked up the key. It was cool to the touch, solid and heavy. Most people bought penthouses for the view or the status, for the ability to look down on the city and feel like a conqueror. I had not bought Unit 12A for the status. I had bought it because it was on the top floor, meaning no one could walk above me. I bought it because the building had 24-hour security, reinforced steel doors, and a front desk that required photo identification for every guest. I bought it because it cost $2.5 million, a sum of money that served as a terrifyingly high wall between me and the life I had left behind. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. I felt a vibration in my chest, a mixture of pride and terrified relief. I stood up, smoothing the front of my charcoal blazer. I did not want to celebrate. I wanted to go there, lock the door, and listen to the silence. The drive to Harbor Point was a blur of rain-slicked streets and gray clouds. When I finally stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 12th floor, I watched the numbers climb with a sense of possessiveness that felt foreign to me. I had spent my entire 20s living in shared apartments, temporary sublets, and spaces where I never fully unpacked because I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was always waiting for the phone call that would demand money I did not have, or the guilt trip that would force me to uproot my life to fix someone else's disaster. The elevator doors slid open directly into my foyer. The space was cavernous, smelling of fresh paint and polished oak. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the harbor, the water churning under the storm, but I turned my back on the view. I walked to the front door, the only entry point, and engaged the deadbolt. Then I engaged the secondary lock I had paid the contractor extra to install a heavy, purely mechanical slide bolt that no keycard could override. I walked through the empty rooms, my heels clicking on the hardwood. 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, a kitchen with marble countertops that felt like ice. I had no furniture yet, just a sleeping bag and a suitcase in the master bedroom. But that was fine. The emptiness was the point. The emptiness was mine. I took out my phone and checked the signal. Strong. Then I did something I had promised myself I would do the moment the deed was recorded. I sent a mass text to my family group chat. Closed on the new place today. Moving in over the next few weeks. Work is going to be incredibly heavy this quarter, so I will be off the grid mostly. We'll send photos when I'm settled. I did not send the address. I spent the first 3 days in a state of aggressive solitude. I orchestrated the movers with military precision, directing boxes to specific zones. I set up my home office first, prioritizing the hardwired internet connection and the shredder. I established my personal law immediately. Even though there was no one there to witness it, no spare keys would be made, no codes would be given out to dog walkers or cleaners. I would be present for every service appointment. Every transaction regarding this home would be documented in writing. It felt excessive. I knew, objectively, that it looked like paranoia. But I also knew that boundaries were like muscles. If you did not exercise them constantly, they atrophied. And I came from a family that specialized in finding the soft spots in a person's resolve and pressing until they broke. The peace lasted exactly 4 days. I was unpacking the kitchen, arranging my spice jars in alphabetical order, when my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with the name Mom. I stared at it. My heart did exactly what I had trained it not to do. It hammered against my ribs. A Pavlovian response to the ringtone. I took a deep breath, counted to 3, and answered, "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my tone bright but firm. "Haley." "Oh, honey, we are just so proud of you," she said. Her voice was sugary, breathless with an excitement that sounded almost genuine. "Your father and I were just talking about how far you have come, from that little studio apartment to a penthouse. It is just incredible. You really are the success story of the family." "Thank you," I said, leaning against the cold marble island. I waited. The praise was never the point. The praise was the preamble. "We really want to see it," she continued. "But I know. You are busy with work. We respect that. We are just so happy you finally have a home that reflects your hard work. You have so much space now. It must feel lonely all by yourself in a place that big." I closed my eyes. There it was, the probe. "It feels peaceful," I said. "I actually really enjoy the quiet." Silence on the other end. It was a heavy silence, the kind that demanded to be filled. I did not fill it. I let it stretch until she was forced to speak again. "Well, that is actually why I am calling," she said, her voice shifting gears. The sugar dissolved, replaced by a tone of frantic, hushed urgency. "It is about Jessica." I gripped the phone tighter. My younger sister. Jessica was 29 years old, but in my parents' eyes, she was perpetually 16, fragile, unlucky, and in need of constant rescue. "What happened?" I asked. "Her lease fell through." My mother said, "It is a disaster. Haley, the landlord is a complete crook. He pulled the rug out from under her at the last minute, claimed he sold the building, and gave her 3 days to vacate. She has nowhere to go. She is sitting here crying her eyes out because she thinks she is going to be homeless." I kept my face neutral, even though no one could see me. "What about her savings?" I asked. "I thought she was working at that boutique agency." "Oh, they let her go weeks ago," my mother said, dismissing the job loss as a minor detail. "It was a toxic environment anyway. She is better off without them." "But Haley, she has no money for a deposit. She has no credit." "We would take her in. You know we would. But with your father's back acting up and the guest room full of your aunt's boxes, we just cannot have the chaos right now." I looked around my pristine kitchen. I looked at the sunlight hitting the clean, bare floors. "I can help her with a deposit," I said. "There is a nice complex on the north side. I can pay the first month and the security deposit. That gives her 30 days to find a new job." "No," my mother said. The word was sharp, instantaneous. "That is too far away, and she is in no state to be alone right now. Haley, she is devastated. She needs family. She needs stability. She needs a lease." "Mom," I said, "she needs her sister." My mother cried out, her voice rising. "How can you be so cold? You are sitting there in a penthouse with 3 empty bedrooms, and your little sister is packing her life into garbage bags. It would be cruel to let her struggle alone in some cheap apartment when you have all that space just sitting there collecting dust." I felt the familiar twist in my gut. The ancient hook of guilt that they had installed in me before I could even speak. Cruel. That was their favorite word. Any boundary I set was cruel. Any money I kept for myself was selfish. "I am not offering a cheap apartment," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am offering to pay for a legitimate rental. I work from home. Mom, I have confidential client calls. I cannot have a roommate." "She is not a roommate. She is your sister." Why do you always have to make everything feel like a business transaction? Family does not outsource family. Haley, we take care of each other. That is what we do. I rubbed my temple. I knew how this went. If I said no, they would show up anyway. If I said no, they would call my boss, my friends, my extended family, painting me as the heartless career woman who let her sister sleep on the street. 2 weeks. I said, "What I will give her 2 weeks. 14 days. That is enough time to find a place. I will still pay the deposit on a new apartment for her, but she cannot stay here long term. This is my home, not a halfway house. Oh, thank God, my mother said, ignoring the timeline entirely. I knew you would step up. I knew it. You are a good sister. Haley, I will tell her right now. She can be there in an hour. Wait, I said. I did not give you the address. Oh, she said. And there was a slight pause, a microsecond of hesitation. We can figure it out. It is the big glass building on the point. Right. We will find it. Text me the unit number. She hung up before I could ask how she knew which building it was. I stared at the phone, the silence of the penthouse suddenly feeling fragile. I had not told them about Harbor Point. I had only said new place. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. Cars looked like toys from this height. I felt a prickle of unease on the back of my neck. But I pushed it down. They probably saw the listing online. They probably stalked my Zillow history. It was fine. I had 2 weeks. I could handle Jessica for 2 weeks. I was wrong about the timeline. They did not arrive in an hour. They arrived in 45 minutes. I watched on the video intercom as the concierge called up, Ms. Foster, I have a large party here to see you. They say they are family. Send them up. I said, pressing the button. I opened the front door and waited. When the elevator opened, it wasn't just Jessica. It was a caravan. My father, Robert, was pushing a luggage cart stacked so high it looked unstable. My mother, Linda, was carrying 2 garment bags and a potted orchid that looked half dead, and trailing behind them was Jessica. My sister looked like she was dressed for a funeral or an audition for a tragedy. She was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, clutching a tissue to her nose, and limping heavily on her left leg. Oh, Haley, my mother gasped, dropping the garment bags in my entryway without asking. It is stunning, just stunning. Look at this light. Robert, my father grunted, maneuvering the luggage cart over my threshold, the wheels leaving faint tracks on the polished wood. Nice place. Hales. Real fancy. Jessica stopped in the doorway. She lowered her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were perfectly rimmed with red, though her makeup was suspiciously intact. Thank you for this, she whispered, her voice trembling. I really have nowhere else to go. I looked at the luggage cart. There were 5 massive suitcases, 3 boxes, a snowboard bag. This was not 2 weeks of luggage. This was everything she owned. I thought you said her lease fell through, I asked, looking at my mother. This looks like she packed for a relocation. She had to get everything out, my mother said, waving her hand dismissively. She couldn't leave her things with that landlord. He might have burned them. I looked at Jessica's leg. What happened to your foot? I twisted it, Jessica said quickly, wincing as she put weight on it. Carrying boxes down the stairs. I think it might be sprained. I watched her walk into the living room. She favored the left leg. Then for a split second, when she reached for the back of my sofa to steady herself, she put her full weight on the injured foot to pivot. She didn't flinch. I filed that away. Okay, I said, clapping my hands together once. Let's get settled. But before we unpack anything, we need to go over the house rules. My father paused, holding a box labeled shoes. House rules. You treat your sister like an Airbnb guest. I walked to the kitchen island and picked up the document I had printed 10 minutes ago. I held it out. I treat my home like my home, I said. Jessica, if you are staying here, even for 14 days, we need to be on the same page. I work from here. My livelihood depends on this environment being controlled. Jessica looked at the paper as if it were radioactive. She didn't take it. My mother snatched it from my hand. Quiet hours from 9 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, my mother read aloud, her voice rising in disbelief. No guests without 24 hours prior written notice. No eating in the living room. Haley, this is ridiculous. This is your sister, not a tenant. It is an agreement, I said calmly. If she signs it, she stays. If she doesn't, I will call an Uber to the hotel down the street and pay for a week there. My father dropped the box on the floor with a loud thud. The sound echoed in the empty room. You have changed. Haley, you have gotten hard. I have gotten safe, I corrected. Jessica burst into tears. Real, loud, sobbing tears. She collapsed onto my new cream-colored sofa, burying her face in her hands. "Stop it," she wailed. "Please, just stop fighting. I will sign it. I will sign whatever crazy thing you want. I just want to lay down." She grabbed the pen from the counter, snatched the paper from my mother, and scribbled her signature without reading a single word. Then she looked at me, her eyes wet and accusatory. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Can I have a key now?" "No key," I said. "I will let you in and out. If you need to leave when I'm not here, we will coordinate." My mother looked at me with a mixture of horror and pity. "You are treating her like a prisoner. I am treating her like a guest in a high-security building." I said, "Let's get your bags to the guest room." The rest of the evening was a blur of passive-aggressive comments. My mother criticized the lack of curtains. My father asked 3 times how much the HOA fees were, doing mental math in the air. Jessica retired to the guest room immediately, claiming a migraine, but I could hear her talking on the phone through the wall, her voice sharp and clear, no longer trembling. By 9 that night, I had ushered my parents out. They left with tight hugs and whispers of, "Be gentle with her," leaving me alone in the apartment with a sister who was currently occupying 20% of my square footage. I went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water. I needed to reset. I needed to remember that this was temporary. 14 days. I could do anything for 14 days. I decided to go down to the lobby to check my mailbox, just to have a moment of air. I took the elevator down, nodding to the night concierge. In the mailroom, a woman was sorting through a stack of envelopes. She looked to be in her 60s, elegant, wearing a silk scarf. She looked up as I entered. "Good evening," she said. "You must be the new owner in 12A. I am Mrs. Gable, from 11B. "Hi," I said, forcing a smile. "Haley Foster. Nice to meet you." "Likewise," she said. She paused, tilting her head. "I met your parents earlier this week. Lovely people." I froze. My hand hovered over my mailbox slot. "I'm sorry," I said. "You met them earlier this week." "Yes, on Tuesday," she said effortlessly. "They were in the lobby. They asked me a few questions about the building. They seemed very excited about you moving in. Your mother was asking about the security protocols. Actually, she was very concerned about your safety. It was sweet." Tuesday. I had closed on the property on Wednesday. I hadn't told them I bought it until today. Saturday, and I had never told them the address. "Oh, right," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Yes, they worry." I grabbed my mail and walked back to the elevator. My heart was no longer hammering. It was beating with a slow, cold thud. They had been here. They had been scouting the building before I even signed the final papers. They knew the address. They knew the security protocols. They had lied to my face, pretending to need directions, pretending to be surprised by the view. This was not a frantic, last-minute emergency because Jessica's lease fell through. This was a plan. I rode the elevator up to the 12th floor. When I stepped into my apartment, the lights were off. Save for the glow coming from under the guest room door, I could hear the faint sound of the television. Jessica was watching a reality show, comfortable, settled. I walked silently into my master bedroom and locked the door. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I did not go to email. I did not go to social media. I opened a folder buried 3 layers deep in my hard drive, labeled Tax Receipts 2018 to 2024. Inside, there were no tax receipts. There were subfolders: Dad, Loan Request, 2019 Jessica, Car Accident, Settlement, 2021, Mom, Medical Bill, Fabrications, 2022. I opened a new document. I typed the date. Incident: the move-in. Claim: Jessica evicted. Emergency: timeline immediate. Fact: parents scouted building 3 days prior to closing. Neighbor confirmed. Address known prior to disclosure. Luggage volume indicates long-term intent. Injury inconsistent with movement. I saved the file. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. They were trying to colonize my life, using my sister as the beachhead. They thought I was the same daughter who used to cry and apologize and hand over her paycheck to keep the peace. They thought the penthouse was a gift I would share because I was desperate for their approval. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a small box I had bought a month ago, hoping I would never need it. It was a contact sensor, smaller than a pack of gum. I stood up and walked softly to my bedroom door. I listened. The apartment was quiet. I slipped out into the hallway. The guest room door was still closed. I moved to the front door of the penthouse, quietly, with hands that did not shake. I adhered the sensor to the inside of the doorframe, painting over it with a dab of matching white correction fluid I had in my pocket. It was invisible unless you knew where to look. I pulled out my phone and synced it to the app. Device active front door. Log started. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to fight them with words they would just twist around until I sounded crazy. I was going to let them lie to me. I was going to let them dig their hole, and I was going to document every single shovelful of dirt. I went back to my room, locked the door, and turned off the light. My trial with Jessica had officially begun, but she didn't realize that she was the one on trial. I lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the wind whipping against the glass 12 stories up. I was safe. I was prepared. Tomorrow, I would buy a camera for the living room. The invasion was not sudden. It was a slow, creeping erosion of my space, calculated to look like affection. By day 5, the geography of my penthouse had shifted in subtle, maddening ways. I came home from a meeting to find the living room furniture rearranged. My cream sofa, which I had positioned to face the harbor view, was now angled toward the television. The heavy marble coffee table had been dragged 2 feet to the left, scratching the floor I had just paid to have sealed. Jessica was sitting on the sofa, her injured foot propped up on a stack of my architectural magazines. She was eating yogurt, and I watched a drop of it fall onto the cushion. She did not wipe it up. "I moved the couch," she said, not looking away from the screen. The glare was bad the other way. I stood in the entryway, my briefcase heavy in my hand. I felt a spike of adrenaline, the fight-or-flight response of an animal finding an intruder in its den. I forced myself to breathe. "Jessica," I said, keeping my voice low. "We talked about this. You are a guest. You cannot rearrange the furniture without asking." She sighed, a long, ragged sound that implied I was being unreasonable. "Haley, it is just a couch. I'm going to be here for a while, so I need to be comfortable. It is not a museum. You are here for 9 more days," I corrected. "Not a while. 9 days. She waved her spoon at me. "Well, when I am here long term, we can look into getting blackout curtains. The sun is really aggressive in the morning." I froze. "When I'm here long term." "There is no long term." "Jessica," I said, walking over to the coffee table and moving the magazines out from under her foot. I placed a coaster under her yogurt cup. "You signed the agreement. 2 weeks. That is it." She rolled her eyes. "You and your little contracts. You act like I am a stranger. I am your sister. You would really kick me out on the street. I am not kicking you out." I said, "I am helping you transition." Speaking of which, I printed out some job listings. I pulled a folder from my bag and set it on the table. It contained 5 leads for administrative assistant roles, all remote, all entry-level. I had even called 2 of them to verify they were hiring immediately. "I am not ready to work," Jessica said, her voice dropping into a register of wounded fragility. "I am traumatized. Haley, my landlord threatened me. I have this injury. I need to heal. You pushing me like this, it triggers my anxiety. It makes me feel like I am a burden." "You are not a burden," I said, carefully selecting my words. "You are an adult, and adults need income. I also found a therapist who takes your insurance. She has an opening on Thursday." Jessica looked at the folder as if it contained anthrax. "I don't need a therapist. I need a home. I need support, not a career coach. Why can't you just let me rest?" She started to cry. It was a soft, pitiful sound, but I noticed her eyes flicking toward me to check my reaction. When she saw I wasn't rushing to hug her, she cried harder. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I did not comfort her. I wrote down the time and the conversation in the Notes app on my phone. 5:30 post-meridian. Subject refuses job search. Claims trauma. Refers to stay as long-term. The next day, the Trojan horse arrived. I was on a video conference call in my office. The door closed. When the intercom buzzed, I ignored it. I had given strict instructions that no one was to be buzzed up without my direct approval. 10 minutes later, I heard the front door open. My heart hammered. I muted my call, excused myself, and walked out into the hallway. My parents were standing in my kitchen. My mother was unloading canvas bags onto the island. My father was opening my refrigerator, rearranging my perfectly organized shelves to make room for a gallon of whole milk and a block of cheddar cheese. "How did you get in?" I asked. My voice was ice. My mother looked up, beaming. "Oh, Haley. You were on a call, and we didn't want to disturb you." The nice young man at the desk let us up. We told him we were bringing groceries for the invalid. She gestured to Jessica, who was hobbling into the kitchen, looking delighted. "Mom made lasagna," Jessica said. I looked at the concierge panel. It was dark. They hadn't even called up. "You cannot just drop by." I said, "We have rules. I am working. We are just helping run the home." "Honey," my mother said, brushing past me to open a cupboard. She frowned at my minimal set of plates. "You really need more dishware if you're going to host. But don't worry. We are going to fill the fridge. You are so thin. Haley, you look like you live on air. You are lucky we are here to take care of you." "I am not hosting," I said, "and I do not need you to run my home. I run my home," my father chuckled. Closing the fridge, he turned to me, his face flushing slightly. "Don't be ungrateful. Hales, we spent $200 on groceries. We are doing you a favor. Most daughters would kill to have parents who care this much." It was a masterclass in rewriting reality. If I kicked them out, I was the hysterical daughter rejecting free food. If I let them stay, I accepted the premise that I needed their help, that I was incapable of managing my own life. I took a breath. "Thank you for the groceries," I said, "but you need to leave in 30 minutes. I have another meeting, and I cannot have noise in the apartment." My mother's smile faltered, then turned into a look of tragic martyrdom. She looked at Jessica. "See?" She whispered loud enough for me to hear. "She is so stressed. It is the job. It makes her hard." They stayed for 2 hours. I went back to my office and put on noise-canceling headphones, but I could feel them in the apartment. I could feel the space shrinking. That evening, after they finally left, I went down to the front desk. I needed to understand how they had bypassed security. The evening concierge, a sharp-eyed man named David, was on duty. "Ms. Foster," he said, nodding. "Everything all right?" "Who was on the desk this afternoon?" I asked. "Around 2 o'clock. That would be Kevin." David said, "The new guy. Did he miss a delivery?" "My parents were let up without me buzzing them in," I said, "and they mentioned they spoke to him. I need to know why protocol was breached." David frowned. He tapped on his keyboard. "Let me check the logs." He stared at the screen for a moment, then tilted his head. "It says here they used a key card," he said. My stomach dropped. "I have one key card," I said, "and it was in my pocket." David turned the screen toward me. The log showed an entry at 2:15 post-meridian. "Access granted key card. 3. Designation family." I stared at the words. "Key card 3. I only requested one card," I said. David looked uncomfortable. "According to the system, a request was submitted last Tuesday for 2 additional cards. One for a Jessica Foster and one generic family pass. The request form has your signature." He pulled up a scanned document. There, at the bottom, was a scrawl that looked vaguely like my signature, but the loop on the Y was wrong. It was too wide. It was Jessica's handwriting. She had forged my name before I had even moved in, likely when they were scouting the building. "Disable them," I said, immediately. "Ms. Foster, if I disable them, David, and I want the physical copy of that request form." "That is fraud." I took the copy of the forged document upstairs. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, focused rage. This wasn't just boundary stomping, this was identity theft. I walked into the apartment. Jessica was on the couch, eating the lasagna. "Did you request extra keycards?" I asked. She didn't look up. Mom and Dad needed a way to get in if there was an emergency, and I didn't want to be trapped here if I wanted to go for a walk. "You forged my signature." I said, "I signed for you." "It is the same thing. You were busy." God. "Haley, why do you have to make everything a federal case? It is just a key. It is a security breach." I said, "I deactivated them. If you leave the building, you will not be able to get back in unless I come down to get you." Jessica slammed her fork down. "You are controlling. You are locking me in. I am securing my home." I snapped, "And if you forge my name on one more document—" "Jessica, you will not be staying here for the remaining 9 days. You will be out tonight." She glared at me, her face twisting. "You think you are better than us because you have money, but you are empty. Haley, you are sad and empty, and you are trying to make everyone else miserable just like you." I walked away. I went to my room and locked the door. I added the forged document to the folder on my laptop. Incident forgery, evidence scanned request form, access log, witness David, concierge. The next morning, I woke up to a note slipped under my door. It was from the building management office. "Dear Ms. Foster, we have received a formal noise complaint regarding Unit 12A. Residents have reported sounds of distress and shouting occurring during the day. Please be advised that Harbor Point maintains a strict noise ordinance. A second violation will result in a fine." I stared at the paper. Sounds of distress. I was at work during the day. The apartment was empty except for Jessica. I went to the kitchen. Jessica was making coffee. "Why is there a noise complaint?" I asked, holding up the letter. She looked innocent. "I don't know. Maybe the TV was too loud. I have been watching movies. Residents reported shouting." I said, "Distress." She shrugged. "I was on the phone with Mom yesterday. Maybe I got a little emotional. I was crying about how mean you were being. The walls must be thin. The walls were concrete. They were not thin." I realized then what she was doing. She wasn't just being loud. She was performing. She was staging audio scenes for the neighbors, creating a narrative where she was the victim of some unseen torment inside my apartment. She was building a witness list for a crime that wasn't happening. I did not argue with her. I showered, dressed in my sharpest suit, and took the elevator down to the management office. Mr. Henderson, the building manager, looked surprised to see me. He was a man accustomed to dealing with wealthy, entitled tenants who screamed about water pressure. He was not used to tenants who arrived with a calm demeanor and a legal pad. "Ms. Foster," he said, "I was going to call you about the letter. I received it." I said, sitting down, "I am here to clarify the situation. I live alone. However, I currently have a temporary guest, my sister, who is recovering from a personal crisis. I work outside the home from 8 to 6. Any noise coming from my unit during those hours is solely generated by my guest. I know it sounds like a domestic dispute," I continued, leaning forward, "but I am not there. I would like to request the security camera footage from the hallway of the 12th floor for the last 3 days. "Hallway footage?" he asked. "Yes. I want to correlate the times of the noise complaints with my own entries and exits. I want to prove for the record that I was not present during these alleged incidents of distress." Mr. Henderson looked at me. He saw the precision in my eyes, the lack of defensiveness. He saw a woman who was building a defense, not making excuses. "I can do that," he said slowly. "And," I added, "I would like a full printout of the access logs for my unit for the last week. Every entry, every exit, including the unauthorized keys I had deactivated last night." He typed for a moment. The printer whirred, and he handed me a stack of warm paper. "Ms. Foster," he said, lowering his voice. "The complaint. It came from the unit next door. Mrs. Gable. She said she heard a young woman crying and begging someone to please stop hurting me." A chill went down my spine. Mrs. Gable, the woman my parents had charmingly intercepted in the lobby, the woman they had primed. "Thank you. Mr. Henderson." I said, I can assure you, no one is being hurt in my apartment, but someone is certainly acting like they are. I took the logs and left. When I returned to the apartment, the atmosphere was suffocating. My parents were there again. They hadn't used a key card. Jessica must have let them in. They were sitting in the living room, a united front on my sofa. "Haley, we need to talk." My father said. I put my keys in the bowl. "I am listening." "Jessica says you threatened to kick her out last night." My mother said, "She says you are tracking her movements, that you locked her out of the building." I deactivated a key she obtained through fraud. I said, "She feels like she is in a prison," my mother cried. "She is afraid to leave the apartment because she thinks you won't let her back in." "She says you are watching her on cameras." I pointed to the ceiling. "There are no cameras." "Mom, she says she feels watched." My mother insisted. "It is the feeling. Haley, you are making her feel unwelcome in her own sister's home. You are gaslighting her." The irony was so thick I could taste it. They were using therapy speak to abuse me. Gaslighting, boundaries, safe space. They had weaponized the language of healing to enforce submission. "She is unwelcome if she breaks the rules." I said. My father stood up. He was red in the face. "This is your sister. You treat her like a criminal. We raised you better than this. You apologize to her. You apologize for making her feel unsafe." I looked at Jessica. She was curled up in the corner of the sofa, looking small and terrified. It was a perfect performance. "I will not apologize," I said, "and you need to leave." "You are kicking us out," my father shouted. "After we brought you food, after we came here to mediate, I am asking you to leave my home." I said, "Now." They left. But not before my mother turned at the door, tears in her eyes. "I don't know who you are anymore. Haley, this money has ruined you." I locked the door behind them. I engaged the deadbolt. I checked the slide lock. I went to the bathroom and vomited. I washed my face, trembling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw Jessica's suitcases off the balcony. But I knew that was exactly what they wanted. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to be the unstable one, so they could justify stepping in to manage my life and my assets. I dialed Morgan. She was my best friend, a corporate attorney in Chicago who had known my family for 15 years. "Haley," she answered, "you sound like you are underwater." "They forged a key." I said, "and they are staging domestic abuse audio for the neighbors." What Morgan asked, I explained everything. The nesting, the groceries, the noise complaints, the fake signature. "Haley, change the locks," Morgan said. Her voice was hard. "Change them tonight. Put her stuff in the hall. Call the police if they try to get in. This isn't a visit. This is an occupation. I can't." I said, "Why?" "Because they are family." "Screw that." "No," I said, "because if I kick her out tonight, they win the narrative. I am the rich, cruel sister who threw the injured waif onto the street in the middle of a mental health crisis. They have already poisoned the neighbors." She thought that by making me the villain, she secured her place as the victim who needed to be housed and cared for. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the access logs. Mr. Henderson had given me. I cross-referenced the times. Tuesday, parents enter lobby. 10 a.m., leave 11:30 a.m., Wednesday, closing day. Parents enter lobby 2:00 p.m., access service elevator, leave 3:00 p.m. They had used the service elevator. How I zoomed in on the log. Override code used maintenance. They hadn't just charmed the concierge. They had bribed someone or stolen a code. This was deeper than I thought. A piece of paper slid under the door. It was the mail delivery, pushed through by the concierge on his rounds. I walked over and picked it up. It was on heavy, cream-colored cardstock. The logo of the Harbor Point Condominium Association was embossed at the top. Notice of incident review. Ms. Foster. Due to multiple complaints regarding conduct in Unit 12A, including verbal altercations audible in common areas and unauthorized access attempts by non-residents, the board is initiating a formal review of your occupancy status. A hearing is scheduled for next Friday. Failure to resolve these issues may result in fines or legal action to cure the breach of covenant. I stared at the letter. Next Friday, the day Jessica was supposed to move out. They had timed it. They wanted the hearing to happen while she was still here, so they could present themselves as the solution. Haley is unstable, but her family is here to help. They wanted to force the board to accept their presence as a stabilizing force. They were trying to turn my home into a trap, using the very rules I love to cage me. I folded the letter and placed it in my pocket. I looked at my sleeping sister. "Okay," I whispered. "You want a hearing? Let's have a hearing." I went to my office and pulled out a fresh binder. I labeled it Exhibit A. The war had officially begun. The conference room of the Harbor Point Condominium Association was colder than the morgue I had once visited to identify a college friend. It was an oval space dominated by a table of polished black granite, surrounded by chairs that cost more than my first car. The air smelled of lemon polish and old money. I sat at the far end of the table. Directly across from me sat the board president, Mr. Sterling, a man with silver hair and a face that seemed carved from limestone. To his right was Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who had so charmingly intercepted my parents in the lobby. There were two other members, a woman in a Chanel suit and a man checking his watch. But Sterling and Gable were the tribunal. "Ms. Foster," Mr. Sterling began, his voice deep and resonant. "We do not enjoy convening these preliminary meetings. We value privacy here. However, we value the tranquility of our community above all else." I folded my hands on the table. I understood the power dynamics in the room instantly. I was the newcomer. I was the young single woman in a building of retirees and established families. I was the variable they had not accounted for. "I appreciate you seeing me," I said. "I want to resolve any concerns as quickly as possible." Mrs. Gable cleared her throat. She did not look at me. She looked at a point just past my left ear. "It is not just concerns, dear. It is the atmosphere. The shouting, the crying. It is very unstable. We have received reports that your unit is housing a volatile domestic situation." She used the word volatile like it was a diagnosis. Mr. Sterling nodded. "Harbor Point is not a dormitory, Miss Foster, nor is it a rehabilitation center. We have been told that you are hosting family members who are, how was it phrased, undergoing significant behavioral crises. This affects property values. If the police are called, it goes on the building's record." I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. It was not anger. It was shame. It was a chemical reaction I had not felt since I was 10 years old. Standing in the principal's office while my mother explained that I was a difficult child who imagined things to get attention. The shame of being the problem. The shame of being the source of disorder. For a second, I wasn't the owner of a $2.5 million asset. I was the little girl who ruined family dinner by spilling the milk. I dug my fingernails into my palm under the table. The sharp pain grounded me. I took a breath, held it for 3 seconds, and exhaled. I killed the 10-year-old girl. I let the 33-year-old strategist take the chair. "I understand your concern," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor I felt in my chest. "However, the narrative you have been fed is incomplete." I opened my leather portfolio. I did not slide papers across the table haphazardly. I placed a single, bound document in front of Mr. Sterling. "This is a log of all noise complaints filed, cross-referenced with building security footage and my own work attendance records." I said, "You will note that on 3 of the 4 occasions where shouting was reported, I was physically located at my office downtown. The 4th occasion, I was in the building gym." Mr. Sterling opened the document. He scanned the first page. I continued, my voice gaining strength. "The person currently staying in my guest room is my sister. She is recovering from a minor injury. There is no behavioral crisis. There is, however, a temporary adjustment period. She departs in 8 days." Mrs. Gable sniffed. "Departing." "We heard she was moving in, that she was seeking residency." I turned my head slowly to look at her. "From whom did you hear that?" Mrs. Gable. "From the guest herself, or from non-residents soliciting information in the lobby, Mrs. Gable stiffened. She adjusted her silk scarf. "I simply speak to people. Ms. Foster." Your parents seemed very concerned about your ability to handle the financial pressure. They mentioned you might need help managing the asset. The trap snapped into focus. My parents weren't just painting me as unstable, they were painting me as insolvent. They were planting the seed that I couldn't afford the penthouse, setting the stage for them to step in as guarantors or co-signers to save the family investment. My finances are a matter of public record and private banking, I said, cold enough to freeze the water in the pitcher on the table. My mortgage is in good standing. My dues are paid. If there are further discussions about my solvency based on hearsay from non-owners, I will consider it a defamation matter. Mr. Sterling looked up from the document. His eyes were different now, less dismissive, more calculating. 8 days, he asked. 7. Now. I said, she leaves next Friday. Ensure that she does. Mr. Sterling said, closing the folder, we will hold the formal hearing in abeyance until then. But Mrs. Foster, yes. If there is another scene in the hallway, we will fine you $5,000 per incident. I walked out of the room with my back straight. I made it to the elevator before I let my shoulders drop. They had listened, but they didn't trust me. I was on probation in my own home. When I unlocked the door to Unit 12A, the apartment smelled of garlic and rosemary. It was disorienting. For the last week, the air had been thick with tension and the smell of Jessica's sickly sweet perfume. Now, it smelled like a Tuscan kitchen. I walked into the living room. It was clean. The magazines were stacked. The cushions were fluffed. Jessica came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She was wearing an apron, my apron, which I had never used, and she was smiling. It wasn't the smirk she used when she thought she had won. It was a soft, tentative smile, the kind she used to give me when we were kids, and she wanted me to do her homework. Hi, she said. I heard you come in. I made risotto. I stood by the door, my portfolio clutching against my chest. What is this? I asked. A peace offering, she said. She gestured to the dining table, which was set for 2. Placemats, wine glasses, a candle. I know I have been difficult. Haley, being displaced. It messed with my head. I took it out on you. I am sorry. I looked at her. I looked for the crack in the mask. It was a good performance. I walked to my office first. I need to put my things down. I stepped into my study. I had left the door closed. It was still closed. I opened it and walked to my desk. Everything looked normal. The laptop was centered. The pen cup was at the right angle, but my eyes went to the bottom drawer. I kept a singular piece of Scotch tape on the bottom corner of the drawer. So clear it was invisible unless you caught the light right. I had placed it there this morning. The tape was broken. I opened the drawer. This was where I kept my personal files, not the house documents, but the old things, letters from college, medical records, and the file labeled estate planning. I pulled the file out. The papers inside were shuffled. The order was wrong. The durable power of attorney draft was on top of the will. It should have been underneath. Someone had been looking for who held the power to make decisions for me if I was incapacitated. I closed the drawer. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. They weren't just looking for money. They were looking for control. They wanted to know if I had appointed a proxy. I walked back out to the dining room. I sat down at the table. Jessica brought out a steaming bowl of risotto. She poured me a glass of white wine. I ate a bite. It was good. Perfect, actually. So, she said, sitting across from me. How was work? Fine. I said, just meetings. She nodded, sipping her wine. You know, Mom and Dad called today. They feel bad. Haley, they think they push too hard. They just worry about you. I kept eating. I am sure they do. They are so proud of this place, she continued, looking around the room. It really is an investment. I was telling them, it is smart that you bought it. Thank you. She paused. She swirled her wine. Is it just in your name? Or did you do that smart rich person thing and put it in a trust? I stopped chewing. There it was, the probe, the follow-up to the search in my office. They couldn't find the deed in the drawer. So she was asking directly, disguised as admiration. I took a sip of water. I decided to run a test. In intelligence circles, they called it a barium meal, feeding false information to a suspected leak to see where it ends up. Actually, I said, wiping my mouth, I didn't put it in a trust. I put it in a holding company. A holding company, she asked, her eyes widening slightly. Yes, it is an LLC, Blue Heron Holdings. It is a tax strategy. But the tricky part is the financing. What do you mean? I lowered my voice. Acting as if I was sharing a vulnerable secret, I didn't put 20% down. I used a leveraged loan. It is interest only for the first year. Honestly, the payments jump to $18,000 a month next January. It is a little terrifying. If I miss one, the bank takes it immediately. Jessica stared at me. She blinked. 18,000, yes. So, I am actually kind of house poor right now. That is why I was so stressed about the extra costs. She nodded slowly. Her expression was a mix of shock and was that relief if I was drowning in debt? I was less powerful. If the house was a ticking time bomb, it was less of a trophy and more of a burden they could exploit. Wow, she said. That is intense, but you will figure it out. You always do. She poured me more wine. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't need to. She had the nugget. The next morning, my phone rang at 10 o'clock. It was my father. Haley, he said. His voice was boomingly cheerful. Just checking in. How are things with your sister? Fine. I said. We had dinner last night. Good, good. That is what I like to hear. Listen, honey, your mother and I were talking. We are thinking about your future. Okay, with the market the way it is, you have to be careful with these big variable loans. Those balloon payments can kill you. I froze. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a coffee mug. What do you mean? I asked. Oh, just general advice, he said quickly. But if you ever get in a bind, with the bank or whatever, Blue Heron or whatever you call it, we could look at stepping in. Maybe take over a share of the equity to help you with the monthly nut. We wouldn't want the bank to foreclose just because the rate jumped. My hand shook. It had been less than 14 hours. Jessica had conveyed the lie to them immediately, and they had swallowed it whole. They believed I was vulnerable. They believed the house was owned by Blue Heron, a company that did not exist, and that I was on the brink of financial ruin. They were not calling to warn me. They were calling to position themselves as the vultures circling the carcass. I appreciate the advice. Dad, I said, but I have it handled. I hung up. I wrote in my notebook. Test confirmed. Subject J provided false financial data to subjects M and F within 12 hours. Subjects attempted to leverage false debt to propose equity takeover. The betrayal was absolute, but it was also useful. Now I knew exactly what they wanted. They didn't want to live here. They wanted to own it. They wanted to seize the asset under the guise of rescuing me from my own bad decisions. But the war wasn't just happening in the penthouse, it was expanding. 2 days later, on Tuesday, I was at my actual office, the corporate headquarters of the logistics firm where I served as general counsel. I was reviewing a merger agreement when my intercom buzzed. Ms. Foster. It is Sarah from HR. Do you have a moment? My stomach turned. HR never called the general counsel unless it was a lawsuit or a firing. Come in, I said. Sarah walked in. She looked uncomfortable. She closed the door behind her. Haley, this is awkward, she said, sitting down. But we had a phone call this morning on the general ethics line. It was anonymous, but the caller identified themselves as a concerned relative. I put my pen down. Let me guess. They said I was under extreme stress. Sarah nodded. She looked at her notepad. They said you were exhibiting signs of a nervous breakdown, that you were making irrational financial decisions, and that they were worried it might affect your fiduciary duties to the company. They suggested we check on you, for your own safety. I stared at her. The room seemed to tilt. This was the nuclear option. They were trying to destabilize my income. If I lost my job, the financial ruin lie I had fed them would become a reality. If I lost my job, I couldn't pay the mortgage. I would need them. Sarah, I said, my voice deadly calm. I am currently dealing with a complex family extortion attempt. This call is part of a harassment campaign designed to force me to liquidate assets. Sarah's eyes went wide. Extortion. I am documenting everything. I will provide you with a formal statement to place in my file. But I need to know, did the caller leave a number? It was blocked. Sarah said, but they mentioned you were delusional, that you thought people were following you. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. That is rich. Sarah, I am not delusional. I am the most sane person in my family. That is the problem. After Sarah left, I sat in my office for a long time. I looked at the city skyline. I realized that my strategy of containment was failing. You cannot contain a fire that is being set by arsonists who are willing to burn down the whole forest just to smoke you out. I needed professional reinforcements. I left work early and went to a brownstone on the east side. The sign on the door said, Vance Associates Real Estate and Tenant Law. I sat across from Marcus Vance. He was a man who wore suspenders and looked like he enjoyed evicting people. So, let me get this straight. He said, looking at my timeline, your sister has been there 9 days. She has no lease. She pays no rent. Correct, I said, but she has established a pattern of occupancy. She has moved in furniture. She receives mail there. I paused. I hadn't checked the mail in 2 days. I don't know. I said, if she receives mail, Marcus said, pointing a finger at me, she is a tenant in the eyes of the law, lease or no lease, especially in this city. If she stays past 14 days, you have to formally evict her. That takes months. She signed an agreement. I said, I pulled out the house rules document. Marcus glanced at it and chuckled. This is a roommate agreement. It's cute, but it's not a surrender of tenancy rights. If she refuses to leave on Friday, and you change the locks, she can call the police. They will let her back in. And then you are the one in trouble for illegal lockout. So what do? I asked. You make her want to leave, he said. Or you find proof that she never intended to be a guest. Fraud negates tenancy in some cases. If you can prove she entered under false pretenses with the intent to squat, we can get an emergency order, but you need a smoking gun. I went home. The clock was ticking. It was Tuesday. Friday was 3 days away. When I entered the penthouse, the vibe had shifted again. Jessica wasn't cooking. She was on the phone in the living room, pacing. I have to go, she said when she saw me, hanging up quickly. She looked guilty. Hey, she said. Hey. I walked to the kitchen. I saw her purse sitting on the counter. It was open. I didn't want to snoop. I really didn't. I wanted to be the bigger person. But the bigger person was about to lose her job and her home. Jessica went into the bathroom. I heard the shower turn on. I walked to the purse. I reached in. I bypassed the wallet. I bypassed the lipstick. I felt a piece of paper, folded into a square. I pulled it out. It was a United States Postal Service form. Official change of address. Confirmation. I unfolded it. Name, Jessica Foster, old address. 442 Elm Street, new address, 1200 Harbor Point Drive, Unit 12A. My eyes scanned down to the date. The date of the request was dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. Before her lease fell through. Before she arrived at my door crying. Before I even closed on the property. She hadn't been evicted. She had terminated her own lease. She had planned this move the moment I told them I was buying a place. The entire crisis. The tears. The injury. The emergency was a scripted play. And there was something else in the bag. A second folded paper. I pulled it out. It was a printout from a website. Squatters' Rights in Harbor Point. A Guide to Tenancy by Possession. Highlighted in yellow was a single sentence. After 14 days of continuous occupancy. A guest becomes a tenant at will. I looked at the calendar. Friday was day 14. If she stayed until Saturday, I couldn't remove her without a court order. I put the papers back in the bag exactly as I found them. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the water running in the bathroom. The shame was gone. The guilt was gone. The lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, my sister actually loved me and was just troubled. That was gone too. I wasn't dealing with family. I was dealing with a hostile takeover. I took out my phone and texted Marcus Vance. I have the smoking gun. Predated change of address and research on squatter rights. It was premeditated. I put the phone in my pocket. Jessica came out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her hair. She smiled at me. "What's for dinner?" she asked. I smiled back. It was the coldest smile I had ever worn. "I am treating you." I said, "Let's order in." I was going to feed her. I was going to let her sleep. And then, I was going to destroy her plan with the same precision she had used to build it. Friday wasn't just move-out day anymore. It was judgment day. Wednesday morning arrived with the heavy, pressurized silence of a courtroom before the gavel falls. It was day 12 of the 14-day trial. The deadline hung in the air, invisible but suffocating. I sat at my kitchen island, a place that was supposed to be my sanctuary for morning coffee and quiet reflection. Instead, over the last week, it had become my command center. I had arranged 3 documents on the marble counter, perfectly aligned. Jessica shuffled into the room at 10 o'clock. She was wearing my silk robe, the one I had bought in Milan, and never worn because I was saving it for a special occasion. She poured herself coffee without saying good morning. "We need to talk about Friday," I said. She stiffened, the mug halfway to her mouth. I sensed the immediate defensive posture, the way her shoulders hunched up as if anticipating a blow. "I am not moving out on Friday." "Haley," she said, her voice raspy, "I told you, I have nowhere to go. The market is impossible right now." I did not raise my voice. I slid the first document toward her. "I understand that finding a permanent place is difficult." I said, "So I have drawn up a compromise. This is a trial extension offer." She looked at the paper but did not touch it. "What is it?" "It is a sub-occupancy agreement." I explained. "It grants you an additional 30 days of residence. 1 month, that gives you 6 weeks total to find a job and an apartment." I watched her face. I saw a flicker of hope, followed immediately by suspicion. 30 days, she asked. "Yes, but it comes with conditions. You must sign this agreement. It stipulates that you are a guest, not a tenant. It defines the move-out date as absolute. It requires you to pay a nominal rent of $100 a week, not because I need the money, but to establish a legal framework for the arrangement, and it strictly prohibits guests and noise violations." Jessica picked up the paper. She scanned it, her eyes darting back and forth. "This looks like a lease," she said. "It has legal codes at the top. It is a contract." I said, "It protects both of us. It gives you a guaranteed roof over your head for 30 days, and it gives me the security of knowing there is an end date. If you sign it, you can stay. If you do not sign it, the original agreement stands, and you leave on Friday." She dropped the paper back onto the counter. It drifted slightly, landing crooked. "I can't sign this," she said. "Why not?" "Because it is insulting," she cried, her voice rising to that pitch she used when she wanted to summon our parents. "You are making me sign a contract to live with my own sister. You are treating me like a stranger. Family implies trust. Haley, this is just cold. Clarity is not cruelty." "Jessica," I said, "clarity is safety. I need to show it to Mom and Dad," she said, backing away. "Dad knows about this stuff. He will tell me if you are trying to trick me." I nodded slowly. I had expected this. If she had no intention of claiming squatter rights, she would have signed it immediately to get the extra time. Her refusal to sign a document that defined her as a guest was the confirmation I needed. She wanted the time, but she did not want the boundary. "Go ahead," I said. "Show them. But the offer expires at 5 o'clock today." She retreated to the guest room. 10 minutes later, I heard her on the phone, her voice muffled but frantic. I went to my office and closed the door. I checked my internal logs. Wednesday, 10:15 ante-meridian. Subject refused formal extension. Cited family trust. Deferred to external leadership. I did not have to wait long for the response. At 6 o'clock that evening, the intercom buzzed. I checked the camera. It was my parents. They were not smiling this time. My father looked thunderous. My mother looked like she was already weeping. I let them up. I wanted this conversation to happen face to face. I wanted to see their eyes when I dismantled their logic. When I opened the door, my father marched in first. He was holding the agreement I had given Jessica, crumpled in his fist. "This is unconscionable," he announced, shaking the paper at me. "Absolutely unconscionable." "Hello to you too, Dad," I said, leaning against the entryway wall. My mother followed him in, rushing past me to hug Jessica, who was sitting on the sofa looking like a war refugee. "You are trying to trap her," my father said, slamming the paper onto the coffee table. I read this garbage. "Guest status. Waiver of tenancy rights. You are trying to strip her of her protections." "Protections?" I asked. Walking into the living room. "She is a guest, Dad. Guests do not need tenancy protections. Tenants pay rent. Tenants have leases. Jessica has neither." "She is your sister," my mother wailed from the couch. "Why do you keep using these legal words? She is flesh and blood. You are treating her like a liability." I looked at them. They were a perfect tableau of righteous indignation. They truly believed that my success was a communal resource, a reservoir they could tap whenever one of them was thirsty. "I am treating her like an adult," I said, "an adult who needs a timeline." "She cannot sign this," my father said, crossing his arms. "It gives you the power to evict her with 24 hours' notice if she breaks a rule. That is not stability. Haley, that is a sword of Damocles hanging over her head. If she follows the rules, the sword never falls." I said, "It is selfish." He spat. "That is what it is. You have this massive apartment, empty rooms, a view of the ocean, and you are counting the days until you can kick your sister out. We raised you to be generous. Where did we go wrong?" I felt the old sting, the conditioned response to their disappointment. But I pushed it down. I looked at the timeline I had built in my head. "You say I am selfish," I said quietly. "You say this is an emergency. You say her lease fell through 2 weeks ago and she had nowhere to go." "That is the truth," Jessica said from the couch. "Then why?" I asked, turning to look directly at her. "Did you tell Aunt Sarah 3 weeks ago that you were moving to Harbor Point?" The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed. "I didn't." Jessica stammered. "I didn't talk to Aunt Sarah." I lied. I hadn't spoken to Aunt Sarah. But I knew the truth about the change of address form I had found in her purse. I was betting on the fact that if she had changed her address officially, she had likely bragged about it to someone. "And why?" I continued. "Did you sell your furniture a month ago if the eviction was a surprise? Why did you list your bed frame on Marketplace 4 weeks ago?" My mother stood up. "Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter who told me." I said, "What matters is the timeline. You claim this is a sudden crisis. The facts suggest it is a planned relocation. You didn't come here because you had nowhere to go. You came here because you decided you were living here before you even asked me." My father's face turned a darker shade of red. He didn't deny it. He pivoted. "So what?" he demanded. "So what if she wanted to be with her sister? Is that a crime? Maybe she was embarrassed to ask. Maybe she wanted to be close to you. And she knew you would be. Like this. Cold. Distant. She had to maneuver because you are so unapproachable. Haley, you forced her to lie because you are so stingy with your love." It was a masterstroke of manipulation. They took their deceit and turned it into my failure. "We lied because you are not safe to tell the truth to." I stared at him. I realized then that there was no bottom to this. There was no amount of proof I could offer that would make them say, "Sorry, we overstepped." They would just rewrite the moral code until I was the villain. "The agreement stands," I said. "Sign it by tomorrow morning, or she leaves Friday at noon." "We are not signing that death warrant," my father said. "And she is not leaving. You try to physically remove her, Haley, and see what happens. You want to drag your sister out by her hair in front of the neighbors? Go ahead. See how that looks for your reputation." They left an hour later, leaving a thick cloud of tension in the apartment. Jessica retreated to her room without a word. I was shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of holding the line. I went to my office to decompress. I opened my laptop to check my emails, needing something mundane to focus on. There was a notification from my credit monitoring service. It had come in an hour ago, while we were arguing in the living room. Alert new inquiry detected. I clicked on it, expecting to see a check from the building management or maybe a credit card offer. Inquirer Quick Cash Lending Services. Type Secured Personal Loan Inquiry. Collateral address 1200 Harbor Point Drive, Unit 12A. I stared at the screen. The blood drained from my face. Someone had attempted to use my penthouse, my home, my deed as collateral for a loan. I knew immediately it wasn't a clerical error. You cannot use a property as collateral without providing detailed information about it. Someone had filled out an application listing this address as their asset. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. I walked down the hallway to the guest room. I didn't knock. I opened the door. Jessica was lying on the bed, scrolling on her phone. She jumped when I entered. "Haley," she said. "You scared me." I walked over to the bed and held up my phone, showing her the screen. "Did you try to take out a loan against my apartment?" I asked. Her eyes went wide. She looked at the phone, then at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Jessica," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "This is fraud. This is a felony. Did you list my home as collateral for a loan?" She sat up, scrambling backward against the headboard. It wasn't a real loan," she stammered. "It was just an inquiry. I just wanted to see if I could get approved." "Why do you need a loan?" I asked. "Why are you trying to borrow money against a property you do not own?" She burst into tears. It wasn't the soft, manipulative crying she usually did. This was the jagged, ugly crying of someone who has been cornered. "I owe people," she sobbed. "I owe a lot of money. Haley. Who credit cards? And a personal loan I took out for the car, and the medical bills. It's like $40,000. They are calling me every day. They said they were going to sue me." I stared at her. $40,000. And you thought you could use my house to pay it off? "Mom and Dad said you would handle it," she screamed. The words hung in the air. What I asked. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Mom and Dad. They said once I was established, you would help me. They said you have so much money now. They said you wouldn't let me go under. They told me to just get in the door, and then we would figure out the finances later. They said you were the family bank now." I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't just about living space. It was a coordinated financial extraction. My parents had deployed Jessica like a suction hose. Get her in, establish residency, guilt Haley into paying the debts. And the loan I asked. Dad said if we showed the bank I lived here, maybe we could get a consolidation loan. He said he would co-sign if I used the address. He said since you are family, it's practically my asset too. I closed my eyes. They were delusional. They truly believed that my name on the deed was just a formality, and that the property belonged to the collective us. I looked at my sister. She was a mess. She was greedy, yes, and entitled, but she was also a victim of two people who had convinced her that she was incapable of surviving on her own. They had crippled her ambition and replaced it with expectation. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I felt a strange, hollow calm. "Jessica, listen to me," I said. She sniffled, looking at me with terrified eyes. "You cannot stay here." I said, "This planet is going to destroy our relationship forever if you stay. But I can see you are drowning. She whispered, "I am so scared." I took a breath. I made a decision. It was the last olive branch I would ever extend. "I will make you a deal," I said. "A one-time offer, non-negotiable." She nodded. "I will pay for a studio apartment for you, in your name. I will pay the first 6 months of rent up front. I will hire movers to take your things there, and I will pay for a career coach to help you find a job that can actually support you." Her eyes widened. 6 months. "Yes, it will be a clean slate. You will have your own space, no one controlling you, no one watching you. But there is one condition. What you leave tomorrow. You pack your bags, you walk out that door, and you never ask me for money again. You sign a document stating that you have no claim to this property and that you are leaving voluntarily." She looked at me. I saw the wheels turning. 6 months of free rent, independence. It was a golden parachute. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I will do it. Do not tell Mom and Dad." I said, "If they find out, they will tell you to stay. They will tell you to hold out for more. You have to choose. Jessica, you can have their validation, or you can have a life. I choose the apartment," she said. "I promise." I stood up. "Good. I will have the papers ready in the morning. Start packing." I walked out of the room feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I had bought my freedom. It would cost me $15,000, but it was cheaper than a lawsuit and cleaner than an eviction. I thought I had won. I was wrong. I had underestimated how deep the rot went. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to the sound of pounding bass. I sat up, disoriented. The apartment was shaking. I put on my robe and walked out into the hallway. The noise was coming from the living room. It sounded like a nightclub. I walked into the main room and stopped. Jessica was there. She was wearing a sequined dress, and she was not alone. There was a stranger sitting on my white sofa, holding a bottle of my vintage whiskey. He was wearing boots on the furniture. "Who is this?" I demanded, flipping on the overhead lights. The man squinted at me. He looked rough. "Who are you?" he slurred. Jessica spun around. She was drunk. Her eyes were glassy. "Haley," she yelled over the music. "This is Mark. He's an old friend. I invited him over to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" I shouted. Grabbing the remote and killing the music. "My new apartment," she laughed, stumbling slightly. "You are paying for everything. We are celebrating my freedom." "You are celebrating at 2 a.m, I asked. "Get him out. Now." "Hey, relax," the man said. Standing up, he was big. He took a step toward me. "Don't be a buzzkill. We're just having fun." I didn't back down. I pointed to the door. "Get out of my house. Make me—" He sneered. And then the knocking started. It wasn't polite knocking. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of security. "Open up, security." My heart sank. I opened the door. It wasn't just the night guard. It was Mr. Henderson, the building manager. He lived on the second floor. He was wearing pajamas and a trench coat, and he looked furious. "Ms. Foster," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "We have complaints from 3 floors. 3 floors? I am so sorry. Mr. Henderson," I said, "I am handling it." "No, you are not handling it," he shouted. "This is the final straw. We have a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of disturbance. I am writing you up. This goes to the board immediately." Jessica stumbled up behind me, giggling. "Is this the party police?" she asked, draping her arm over my shoulder. "Mr. Henderson looked at her, then at the man with the whiskey bottle, then at me. "You have lost control of your unit." "Ms. Foster," he said coldly. "Expect a formal citation in the morning." He turned and marched down the hall. I closed the door. I turned to Jessica. "The offer is rescinded." I said. She blinked, the smile fading. "What the apartment? The 6 months of rent? It is gone. You just blew it." She looked at me, and for a second, the drunkenness vanished. Her eyes became sharp, calculating. "No, I didn't," she said, and then I realized she hadn't invited the man over to celebrate. She hadn't turned up the music because she was drunk. She had done it on purpose. She knew that if she caused a scene tonight, right after I offered her a way out, it would destabilize me. It would prove to the board that I was the problem, that I couldn't manage my guests. It would create chaos, and chaos was the only environment in which my parents could thrive. They had told her to do this. If she offers you a deal, blow it up, make a mess. We need to be the ones to clean it up. I looked at her with a mixture of horror and awe. She was willing to destroy her own golden parachute just to serve their agenda. "Get him out," I said quietly, "or I will call the actual police." The man left. Jessica went to bed, slamming her door. I did not sleep. I sat in the kitchen, watching the sun come up. At 8 o'clock, I went down to the management office. Mr. Henderson wouldn't look at me. I need a security review. I said. He kept typing. You have a hearing tomorrow. Ms. Foster, save it for the board. Please, I said. It is relevant to the hearing. I need to know something about the keycard request. He sighed. He pulled a file. What? The email that requested the extra keys. I said, the one you said came from me. Can I see the header? He turned the screen around. From haley.foster@gmail.com. Subject key request. I stared at it. My personal email was haley.j.foster@gmail.com. They had created a fake email address, a spoof account. Look at the timestamp, I said. He looked. Tuesday, 2:14 p.m. And look at the syntax. I said, please facilitate the acquisition of 2 access metrics. I never use the word metrics for keys. I said, but my father does. He is an engineer. Mr. Henderson looked at me. He saw the exhaustion in my face. He saw the desperation of a woman who was being framed by her own blood. Someone impersonated you, he asked. Yes, and I can prove that I was in a deposition at 2:14 on Tuesday. I didn't send that email. He printed the page. Keep this, he said. You are going to need it. I went back upstairs. I spent the day building the folder. I didn't pack clothes. I didn't clean. I built a case file. Exhibit A, the forged key request. Exhibit B, the predated change of address. Form photo. Exhibit C, the credit inquiry log. Exhibit D, the timeline of emergency versus reality. Exhibit E, the noise complaints. Versus my work logs. I stripped the emotion out of it. I removed the word sister. I removed the word parents. I replaced them with unauthorized occupant and external parties. It was the hardest thing I had ever written. It was an indictment of my entire history. At 5 o'clock on Thursday, the endgame arrived. The intercom buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was my parents. And they weren't just visiting. My father had 2 large suitcases. My mother had a garment bag and a duffel. I pressed the talk button. What are you doing? I asked. Haley. My father's voice came through. Tinny and resolute. We heard about last night. Jessica called us. She is hysterical. She says you threatened her. I did not threaten her. We are coming up, he said. We are going to stay for a few days. Just until things stabilize. We can't leave the 2 of you alone when things are this volatile. We are moving in to help manage the household until the hearing. They were doing exactly what I feared. They were occupying the territory. They were using the chaos they had manufactured as the justification for their invasion. We are here to fix the mess we made. Do not come up, I said. We are already in the elevator. My father said. Jessica buzzed us in. I stepped back from the monitor. The elevator was coming up. I could hear the hum of the cables in the shaft. I looked at the folder on the counter. The evidence. The truth. I looked at the door. They were coming to take over. If they got those suitcases through the door, if they spent one night. The board would see a multi-generational household of chaos. I would never get them out. I had to make a choice. I could open the door and let the cancer spread. Or I could perform surgery, brutal, painful, irreversible surgery. The elevator chimed. I walked to the door. I didn't open it. I waited for the knock. It came, heavy, entitled. Haley, open up. It's Dad. I took a deep breath. I put my hand on the deadbolt. I didn't unlock it. I double-locked it. I am not opening the door. I said through the wood, Haley. My mother's voice. Don't be ridiculous. We have luggage. Open the door. I turned around. Jessica was standing in the hallway behind me. She was smiling. She thought help had arrived. Open it, she said. No, I said. This was it. The standoff. I picked up my phone. I dialed the front desk. This is Ms. Foster in 12A, I said, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I have intruders in my hallway attempting to gain access. They are not residents. Please send security to remove them. Jessica's smile vanished. Through the door, I heard my father gasp. You wouldn't dare. I just did. I whispered. I stood there, waiting for the sound of boots on the marble. The family reunion was over. The war was live. The standoff in the hallway lasted exactly 90 seconds. I stood on one side of the threshold, my hand on the deadbolt, while my parents stood on the other, flanked by their luggage and the growing curiosity of the neighbors. Doors down the corridor were cracking open. I saw Mrs. Gable's silver head poking out from 11B, her eyes hungry for the spectacle. The elevator dinged again. 2 uniformed security guards stepped out, their radios crackling. "Ms. Foster," the lead officer asked, assessing the scene. "We received a report of unauthorized entry attempts." My father turned to them, his chest puffed out in that specific way older men do when they intend to borrow authority. "Officer, thank goodness. My daughter is having an episode. We are trying to get into her apartment to help her, and she has locked us out. We are residents." He gestured to the suitcases as proof. I looked at the neighbors. I looked at the guards. I realized in that split second that if I let them drag my parents away, I would win the battle but lose the war. The narrative would be Haley Foster had her elderly parents arrested. The board would see it as the ultimate sign of household dysfunction. I needed to move the theater of war to a location where I controlled the acoustics. "Officers," I said, my voice calm and carrying clearly down the hall. "There has been a misunderstanding. My relatives are confused about their visitation dates. I will allow them inside for 10 minutes to collect their things and discuss their departure. If they are not out by the elevators in 15 minutes, I will call you back to escort them." The guard looked at me, then at my father. 10 minutes. "Ma'am, 10 minutes. I confirmed. I stepped back and opened the door wide. I didn't look at my parents. I walked straight to the kitchen island, my podium, and waited. They shuffled in. The triumph on my mother's face was sickening. She thought I had folded. She thought the pressure of public embarrassment had cracked me. She dragged her suitcase over the threshold, the wheels rumbling on the hardwood like thunder. "See?" she whispered to Jessica as she passed. She just needed a little push. They congregated in the living room. My father dropped his bags with a heavy thud, looking around with a satisfied smirk. "Okay," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Let's calm down. We are all inside. We are safe. Now. Haley, why don't you make some tea? We need to de-escalate." I did not move toward the kettle. I stood behind the island, my hands resting on a single sheet of paper I had typed up 10 minutes ago, anticipating this precise scenario. "There will be no tea," I said, "and you are not unpacking." My father frowned. "Haley, stop the drama. We are here. We are staying until the hearing on Friday. We need to present a united front to the board." I picked up the paper. "I am going to read this once," I said. "I suggest you listen, because it is the only notice you will receive." I began to read. My voice was flat, devoid of the tremor that was currently vibrating through my ribcage. Notice of termination of licensure. Occupant Jessica Foster is hereby notified that her license to occupy the guest premises of Unit 12A expires definitively on Friday, October 14th, at 12 o'clock post-meridian. Non-occupants. Robert and Linda Foster are hereby notified that they have no license to enter or remain on the premises. Any attempt to remain past the stated time will be treated as criminal trespass under the state penal code. I looked up. My mother was staring at me with her mouth slightly open. Jessica was looking at the floor. My father's face was turning a dangerous shade of purple. I continued. The homeowner reaffirms the offer of relocation assistance payment of 6 months of rent for a studio apartment in the name of Jessica Foster, plus moving costs, contingent on immediate vacation of the premises. This offer expires in exactly 10 minutes. I set the paper down. "You have 10 minutes to decide," I said. "Do you take the apartment and a fresh start, or do you take a trespass charge?" My father exploded. It wasn't a metaphor. He slammed his hand onto the back of my white sofa, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Who do you think you are?" he roared. He advanced toward the kitchen. I watched him coming. I didn't flinch. I kept the marble island between us. "You are reading legal codes to your mother," he shouted, spitting the words, "You are threatening us with police." After everything we sacrificed for you, we paid for your prep school. We paid for your first car. We carried you when you were nothing. And now you have a little money and you think you can treat us like employees. I am not debating my worthiness. Dad, I said, I am stating the terms of access to my property. Property, he yelled. That is all you care about. This cold, empty box. You chose this concrete over your own blood. You are sick. Haley, you are sick in the head. I looked at my mother. She was weeping now. That soft, practiced weeping that usually made me crumble. Haley, please, she sobbed. We just want to be a family. Why do you hate us? Why are you so cruel? Jessica is hurt. She needs us. We are just trying to help you run this big place. It is too much for one person. You are overwhelmed. We can see it. I am not overwhelmed, I said. I am occupied. Jessica, who had been silent, suddenly stood up. She walked over to stand between our parents. She looked at me, and her eyes were different. They weren't pleading anymore. They were clinical. Mom, Dad. Stop, she said softly. They quieted down. Looking at her, don't you see, Jessica asked, gesturing to me? Look at her eyes. Look how rigid she is. She isn't listening to reason. She turned to my father. She is having a break. Dad. The room went dead silent. What my father asked. A mental break, Jessica said, her voice dripping with faux concern. I have been watching her all week. She is paranoid. She thinks the neighbors are spying on her. She thinks I am plotting against her. She is tracking my movements with sensors. She is writing down everything we say in a notebook. She looked at me with a terrifying tenderness. Haley, she said, you are not well. The stress of the mortgage, the job, being alone, it has snapped something. You are acting erratic, threatening to call the police on your parents. That is not sane behavior. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. Oh my God. You are right. The isolation. We should call someone, Jessica suggested. Not the police. Maybe a doctor, or the emergency crisis line. If she is a danger to herself or others, we have a duty, right or for her own good. I froze. The cold that washed over me was absolute. This was the checkmate. They weren't just trying to stay. They were trying to invalidate my agency. If they called emergency services and claimed I was having a psychotic break, citing my paranoia about their schemes as proof they could have me placed on a 72-hour hold. In that time, they would have possession of the apartment. They would have access to my files. They would establish themselves as my caretakers. It was the nuclear option, and they were going to do it. My father was already reaching for his phone, a look of grim resolution on his face. It is for the best. Haley, he muttered, we need to get you stabilized. I moved. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen 3 times. I held the phone up, the camera lens facing them, the red recording light pulsing clearly on the screen. I am recording this interaction. I said, my voice was loud, clear, and perfectly steady. I am stating for the record that I am calm, lucid, and in full control of my faculties. I am documenting that my family members who have been asked to leave my property are now conspiring to fabricate a medical emergency to gain leverage over my assets. My father's hand froze halfway to his pocket. I continued, panning the camera to catch each of their faces. Jessica Foster has just suggested a false report of a mental health crisis. This recording is being backed up to a cloud server in real time, if any emergency services are called. This video will be provided to the responding officers as evidence of a malicious false report, which is a felony in this state. I zoomed in on Jessica. Do you want to repeat that diagnosis for the camera? Jessica, I asked. Or do you want to admit that you are trying to intimidate me into letting you stay? The change was instantaneous. It was like watching a spell break. The concern on Jessica's face vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, unfiltered hatred. My mother stopped crying mid-sob. My father lowered his hand. They knew. They knew that a mental break narrative relied on me being hysterical and them being calm witnesses, if I was the one holding the camera. Speaking in complete paragraphs, citing the law. Their story fell apart. "Put the phone away." My father growled. "No," I said, "you have 2 minutes left. The offer for the studio apartment is still on the table. But if you are not out that door when the timer hits 0, I am sending this video to the building board, your employer, Dad, and the police." My father stared at me. He looked at the phone, then at the suitcases. He realized he had lost the skirmish. He couldn't force a medical intervention while being recorded committing extortion. "Fine," he spat. "We are leaving. But we are not done," he added, pointing a finger at the lens. "You have a hearing on Friday, and we will be there. We will tell the board exactly how you treat your family. We will tell them about the instability in this house. Go ahead." I said. They grabbed their bags. Jessica didn't look at me. She grabbed her purse and followed them out. I followed them to the door. Phone still raised. I filmed them walking into the hallway. I filmed the elevator doors closing. Only then did I stop recording. I locked the door. I engaged the deadbolt. I engaged the slide lock. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the phone. I had survived the invasion, but I knew what they were doing. They were retreating to regroup. They were going to pour everything they had into the board hearing. They were going to try to use the homeowners association, the very entity I relied on for order, as the weapon to break me. I checked my email. There it was, a notification from Mr. Sterling, the board president. Urgent hearing rescheduled. Due to the escalating household instability and the involvement of security personnel this evening. The board has moved the review hearing to tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Attendance is mandatory. They had called the board from the lobby. They had reported the incident as proof that I was out of control. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen. I poured the cold tea down the sink. I had 12 hours. I spent the night preparing. I didn't sleep. I printed logs. I organized emails. I highlighted timestamps. I prepared a binder for each board member. I treated it like a closing argument for a murder trial. At 8:45 in the morning, I walked into the conference room. My family was already there. They had been allowed in as witnesses. They sat on one side of the granite table. My mother was wearing a modest, muted dress. Jessica was wearing a soft cardigan, looking pale and fragile. My father was wearing a suit. They looked like a respectable, heartbroken family. I was wearing my charcoal trial suit. My hair was pulled back so tight it hurt. "Ms. Foster," Mr. Sterling said. "Please, sit." I sat opposite them. I did not look at them. "We are here," Mr. Sterling began, "to discuss the disturbances in Unit 12A. We have reports of shouting, police involvement, and a general atmosphere of chaos that is disturbing the peace of Harbor Point." My father spoke up. "Mr. Sterling, if I may, we are simply trying to care for our daughter. She has been struggling. We have been trying to maintain order, but she has been resistant to family support. We believe the stress of the building is too much for her." He was pivoting. He wasn't saying I was crazy anymore. He was saying I was incompetent. He was implying I didn't belong in a luxury building. Mrs. Gable, the board member with the silver hair, nodded sympathetically. "It does seem like a lot for a single young woman," she said. "Perhaps a family presence is needed to stabilize the investment." I looked at Mrs. Gable. Then I looked at my parents. There was a look of recognition passed between my mother and Mrs. Gable, a small, sad smile, and then I realized the friend they had made in the lobby, the woman they had charmed. Mrs. Gable wasn't just a neighbor. She was their advocate inside the room. They had been working her for 2 weeks, feeding her the poor Haley story over tea and lobby chats. I opened my binder. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I would like to present the facts regarding the instability in my unit. I ask that we keep this informal." Mrs. Gable interrupted. "We don't need lawyers here. We need compassion. Compassion does not pay the mortgage." "Mrs. Gable," I said, "and it does not secure the building." I slid the first document across the table. "Exhibit A," I said. This is a copy of an email sent to building management on Tuesday, requesting additional keycards for my unit. Mr. Sterling picked it up. As you can see, I continued. The email is from a spoofed account. The timestamp places the sender at 2:14 post-meridian. At that time, I was in a sworn deposition at my firm. Here's the affidavit from my paralegal confirming my location. I slid the second document. This email was not sent by me. It was sent by someone attempting to bypass building security protocols to gain unauthorized access. That is not a family dispute. That is identity theft and a security breach. Mr. Sterling frowned. He looked at the email, then at my father. My father shifted in his seat. We were just trying to help, he mumbled. We needed keys to walk the dog. I don't have a dog, I said. Silence. I moved to the next tab. Exhibit B, I said. A log of the noise complaints filed against my unit. You will notice they all occur between the hours of 9 and 5. Here are my work logs. I was not present for a single one of them. The disturbance is not coming from me. It is coming from the unauthorized guest who has refused to vacate. I looked at Jessica. She shrank into her cardigan, and finally, I said, Exhibit C. I played the audio file from my phone. It was the recording from last night. Jessica's voice. She is having a break. Dad, we should call someone. For her own good. My voice. I am recording this interaction. Jessica's voice. Put the phone away. My father's voice. Fine. We are leaving. I stopped the recording. The transition from concern to strategic retreat was audible. It was undeniable. This was an extortion attempt. I said, my family attempted to weaponize a mental health crisis to gain control of my residency. The room was very quiet. Mr. Sterling looked at my parents. His expression had shifted from annoyance to disgust. The Chanel suit woman looked horrified. However, Mrs. Gable spoke up. Her voice was sharp. Ms. Foster, this is highly irregular. Recording your own family. It seems paranoid. It supports the idea that you are not creating a welcoming environment. Families fight. That doesn't mean you ban them. We expect residents to manage their guests without this level of hostility. She was still pushing. She was personally invested in being right about me. I turned to Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable. I said, are you aware that your position on this board requires impartiality? Excuse me, she bristled. I turned back to Mr. Sterling. I have one final document. I said, I pulled out the deed to my penthouse. I flipped to the rider on the last page. When I purchased this unit, I insisted on a specific rider due to a history of stalking and harassment I have faced in the past. It is the high security clause. It states that the owner has the unilateral right to permanently ban any non-resident from the premises and common areas, regardless of biological relation. If a threat to quiet enjoyment is documented, I pointed to the clause. The building is contractually obligated to enforce this ban. If the board pressures me to allow these individuals access, the board is in breach of my purchase contract. I will not only sue the individuals, I will sue the association for failure to provide the security services I paid for. Mr. Sterling read the clause. He looked at Mrs. Gable. She has grounds. Margaret, he said quietly, it is in the deed. Mrs. Gable turned red. But they are her parents. That is a biological fact, not a legal license. I said, I stood up. I am formally requesting that Robert Foster, Linda Foster, and Jessica Foster be placed on the building's permanent no trespass list. I want their photos at the front desk. I want their access completely revoked effective immediately. Mr. Sterling nodded slowly. He looked at my father, who was now pale and sweating. Mr. Foster, he said, I think it is time for you to leave. The board will uphold the resident's request. You are no longer welcome at Harbor Point. My father stood up. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. Fine, he said. Keep your damn fortress. You will be the loneliest person in it. He walked out. My mother followed, sobbing into a handkerchief. Jessica sat there for a moment longer. She looked at me. There was no sadness in her eyes, just a cold calculation. "You think you won?" she whispered. "You just lost everyone who ever gave a damn about you." She stood up, grabbed her purse, and stormed out. But in her haste, her purse clipped the edge of the granite table. It tipped over. A folder slid out and spilled onto the floor. She didn't stop to pick it up. She just kept walking. I waited until the door closed. The board members were awkwardly shuffling papers. I walked over and picked up the folder. It wasn't a resume. It wasn't a lease application. It was a handwritten spreadsheet on yellow legal paper. The title at the top was Family Repayment Plan. Draft. I looked at the columns. Asset Penthouse 12A. Est. Value $2.5 million. Equity $500,000. Allocation Jessica's debt consolidation $40,000. Allocation. Mom and Dad. Retirement supplement. $2,000 per month. Strategy. Cash out refinance via Haley. I stared at the numbers. They hadn't just wanted a place to stay. They had itemized me. They had calculated my net worth and divided it up amongst themselves like I was already dead. The instability they tried to create wasn't just to control the home. It was to force a financial restructuring where they became the beneficiaries. I looked at the date on the top of the page. It was dated 2 months ago, before I bought the place, before they even knew I was looking at Harbor Point. They had been planning to harvest me the moment they smelled money. I closed the folder. "Ms. Foster's Sterling asked, "Are you all right?" I looked at him. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't triumph. It was the feeling of a limb being severed, painful, bloody, but necessary to stop the gangrene from reaching the heart. "I am fine, Mr. Sterling," I said. "I just need my keycard reactivated." I walked out of the conference room. I was alone. I was safe. And I finally knew exactly what my family meant when they said they wanted to be close. They wanted to be close enough to feed. I stood alone in the conference room for exactly 60 seconds after the door clicked shut. The silence was heavy, vibrating with the aftershocks of the confrontation. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash that comes after you finally detonate the bridge you have been standing on for 33 years. I looked down at the yellow legal pad in my hand. The Family Repayment Plan. The handwriting was my father's tight, angular, aggressive. The columns were neat. The math was precise. They had calculated the equity in my home down to the cent. They had assigned themselves a monthly stipend. They had treated my life's work like a dividend stock they were waiting to cash out. I could have walked away. I could have gone back up to Unit 12A, locked the door, and watched them leave on the security monitors. But that would have been a partial victory. They would have left believing they were the victims, martyred by a cold, ungrateful daughter. They would have told themselves I misunderstood their intentions. I needed them to know that I saw the ledger. I needed them to look at this piece of paper and admit, even if only with their eyes, that this was not love. It was accounting. I walked out of the conference room and pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator descent felt agonizingly slow. When the doors slid open, the lobby was bright and echoing. They were there. They hadn't left. They were standing near the fountain, a cluster of indignation and luggage. My father was on his phone, pacing, his voice booming as he likely recounted the injustice to an aunt or a cousin. My mother was sitting on a bench, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, while Mrs. Gable, the traitorous board member, stood over her, patting her shoulder and murmuring comforts. Jessica was standing apart from them, staring out the glass doors at the gray harbor, her arms wrapped around herself. I walked across the marble floor. The sound of my heels was sharp and rhythmic, like a gavel striking a sounding block. Mrs. Gable saw me first. She straightened up, her face tightening into a mask of disapproval. "Ms. Foster," she said, her voice dripping with censure. "I really think you have done enough damage for one morning. Your poor mother is distraught." I ignored her. I walked straight to my father. He hung up the phone when he saw me, his eyes narrowing. "Here she comes," he sneered. "The Queen of Sheba. Come to evict us from the lobby, too." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I held up the yellow legal pad. I held it calm and steady, right at his eye level. You dropped something, I said. My father looked at the paper. For a second, there was no recognition. Then, his eyes focused on the handwriting. He saw the columns. He saw the title, Family Repayment Plan. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a physical blow. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at my mother. She looked up, saw the paper, and froze. Her hand stopped midway to her face with the tissue. Jessica turned around from the window. She saw the pad. She closed her eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. There was a silence that stretched until it felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. It was a raw, naked silence. The mask of the concerned parents had slipped, and underneath was the machinery of their greed, exposed in daylight. I lowered the paper. I looked my father in the eye. When I asked, my voice was quiet, barely more than a whisper, but in the cavernous lobby, it carried, "When did you decide I was a resource instead of your daughter?" My father licked his lips. He looked around to see if anyone was listening. Mrs. Gable was staring at the paper, confused. "It is not what it looks like," my father said. His voice was rough, lacking its usual boom. "It was just brainstorming. We were just talking about the future." "The future?" I asked. "This is dated 2 months ago, before I even made an offer on this place. You were calculating my equity before I owned the deed. You were assigning yourself $2,000 a month of my income before I had even moved in." "It is family planning," my mother blurted out. Standing up, she wiped her face, her expression shifting from grief to defensiveness. "We are a family. Haley, we share. You have so much excess. You have this massive apartment, this high-paying job, and we are struggling on a fixed income. Is it a crime to hope that our successful daughter might want to help her aging parents?" "Help," I repeated. "This isn't help. This is extraction. This is a liquidation strategy." I pointed to the line about Jessica's debt. "You told Jessica that I would handle it," I said. "You set her up. You sent her here with a fabricated emergency and a fake injury so she could establish residency, just so you could force me to refinance my home to pay off her credit cards. You used her as a battering ram to break into my bank account." Jessica flinched. She looked at our parents. "Is that true?" she asked, her voice small. "Is that why you told me to come early?" To anchor the claim, my father turned on her. "Don't be stupid. Jessica, we did it for you. You are the one with the debt. We were trying to find a solution that worked for everyone by stealing from Haley." Jessica asked. "By sharing the wealth," he shouted. He turned back to me, his face red and ugly. "You owe us. Haley, you think you got here by yourself? Who drove you to piano lessons? Who paid for your braces? Who co-signed your first student loan? We built you. You are our investment. And now that you are paying out, you want to cut us off. That is selfish. That is unnatural." I stared at him. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a stranger. This man, who I had spent my life trying to please, who I had feared and admired, was just a desperate, greedy man who felt the world owed him a retirement plan because he had performed the basic duties of parenthood. "I am not an investment," I said. "I am a person, and I am done paying dividends." I took a step back. I looked at the three of them. My father, seething with entitlement. My mother, playing the victim. Jessica, caught in the middle. A pawn who was just realizing she was expendable. "I have one last offer," I said. "And because I am not you, it is going to be generous." I looked at Jessica. "The offer stands," I said. "I will pay for the studio apartment for 6 months. I will pay for the movers. I will pay for the career coach. It is a clean start. $15,000 of support." Jessica's eyes widened. "You would still do that, after the party, after the lies?" "Yes," I said, "because I know you were following orders, but there is a condition." I turned to my parents. "You leave right now," I said. "You get in your car. You drive away. And you sign a legal agreement that states you will not contact me or visit this property for 1 year. You leave Jessica alone to live her own life. You stop managing us." My father laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. You want us to sign a restraining order against ourselves for what? A cheap apartment for your sister. You think you can buy us off. I think I am offering you a way to save face. I said, "We are not going anywhere," he said, crossing his arms. "We are not leaving until we settle this. We are not abandoning Jessica, and we are certainly not signing any garbage contract that bans us from our own family. You will break. Haley, you always do. You can't stand the guilt." He looked at me with a smug certainty. He was banking on the little girl inside me, the one who was terrified of being called a bad daughter. But that little girl wasn't here. She had been evicted when I found the spreadsheet. I looked at him for a long moment. I tried. I said softly. I turned to the security desk. The head of security, a man named Mr. O'Malley, had been watching from a discreet distance. "Mr. O'Malley," I said. My voice was clear. He stepped forward immediately. "Yes." "Miss Foster. These individuals have been asked to leave the premises multiple times," I said. "They have refused. They are now trespassing on private property. Please remove them. And please file a formal incident report with the local precinct for harassment and attempted extortion. I will be pressing charges." My father's smugness vanished. He looked at Mr. O'Malley, then at the two other guards who were closing in. "You are joking," he said. "Haley, call them off. This isn't funny. I am not laughing." "Dad," I said. Mr. O'Malley stepped up to my father. "Sir, you need to collect your items and leave the property immediately. If you resist, we will call the police and have you arrested for criminal trespass." My mother let out a wail. "Arrested Robert. Do something." My father looked at me. His eyes were wide with shock. He had never believed I would actually do it. He thought the bond of blood was a get-out-of-jail-free card that he could swipe forever. "You are dead to me," he spat. "You hear me? You are dead to us." I looked at him, feeling a profound, aching sadness. "I know," I said. "I have been dead to you for a long time. I was just a ghost signing checks." The guards moved them. It wasn't violent, but it was forceful. They picked up the suitcases. They guided my parents toward the revolving doors. My mother was crying loudly now, looking back at Mrs. Gable, who had turned her back and was pretending to examine a potted fern. Jessica stood frozen. She wasn't moving. The guard looked at her. "Ma'am, you too." She looked at me. She looked terrified. "Haley," she whispered, "what about me? What about the apartment?" I looked at her. I saw the fear, but I also saw the sister who had invited a stranger into my home to stage a fake party. I saw the sister who had forged my signature. "I cannot save you. Jessica," I said, "not while you are holding their hand. You have to walk out that door on your own, if you want the help. You call me from a number they don't control, but you leave with them today." She stared at me. Tears streamed down her face. She looked at our parents being ushered out the door, then back at me. "They made me do it," she sobbed. "They told me if I didn't get residency, they would cut me off too. I just wanted a home. Haley, I just wanted to be safe." "I know." I said, "Me too." She turned and ran after them. I watched through the glass as they stood on the sidewalk, arguing. My father was shouting at the doorman. My mother was clutching her purse. Jessica was standing a few feet away, looking like she didn't know which direction was north. I watched until a taxi pulled up and they loaded their bags. I watched the taillights disappear into the gray city traffic. It was over. I turned back to the lobby. Mrs. Gable was still standing by the fern. She looked pale. She knew she had backed the wrong horse. I walked past her. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The shame on her face was loud enough. I took the elevator back up to the 12th floor. When I opened the door to the penthouse, the silence hit me like a physical wave. It was absolute. No TV. No fake sobbing. No passive-aggressive comments. Just the sound of the wind against the glass and the hum of the refrigerator. I walked through the apartment. I went to the guest room. It was a mess. The bed was unmade. There were empty soda cans on the nightstand. A towel was on the floor. I picked up the towel. I folded it. I walked to the kitchen. The yellow legal pad was still in my hand. I walked to the shredder in my office. I fed the family repayment plan into the machine. I watched the teeth chew up the columns and the calculations. I watched my father's handwriting turn into confetti. It should have felt triumphant. It should have felt like the end of a movie where the hero stands on the mountaintop. But it didn't. It felt like a funeral. I sat down in my office chair and swiveled to face the window. I looked out at the harbor. The water was choppy. Gray caps on the waves. I realized then that I was grieving. I wasn't grieving the loss of my parents, because I had never really had them. I was grieving the hope that one day, if I was successful enough, good enough, stable enough, they would just love me. I was grieving the fantasy that the Penthouse could be a place for family dinners and holidays. I had won the war, but the battlefield was scorched earth. My phone buzzed. I picked it up. It was an email from Mr. Sterling, the board president. Subject regarding board member conduct. Dear Ms. Foster, following the events of this morning, the board convened an emergency session. It has come to our attention that Mrs. Gable failed to disclose a conflict of interest regarding her prior association with your family through the Regional Heritage Foundation. We have accepted her resignation from the board effective immediately. On behalf of the association, we apologize for the undue pressure placed on you regarding your guest policy. Your security protocols will be strictly enforced moving forward. The individuals in question have been permanently flagged in our system. Sincerely, Arthur Sterling. I put the phone down. So that was it. The twist. Mrs. Gable knew them from a charity circle. They had worked her from the inside, using social leverage to turn my own home against me. It was so calculated, so insidious. I stood up and walked into the living room. I looked at the white sofa where my father had slammed his hand. I looked at the spot on the floor where Jessica had spilled the folder. The apartment was beautiful. It was safe. It was mine. But it was also a fortress. And the thing about fortresses is that they are designed to keep people out. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hand was steady now. I thought about Jessica. I wondered where she was going tonight. Probably a motel. Probably listening to my father rant about how I was ungrateful, how I had humiliated them. I told them I am done. I don't expect the money or the apartment. I blew that. But do you think that career coach is still a real thing? I don't want a handout. I just want to know how to write a resume that doesn't include their names as references. I want to be real. I stared at the screen. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a promise. It was just a question, a small, honest question from someone who had just realized she was drowning. She had left them. She was at a motel on 4th. She was asking for a resume, not a check. I looked at the water. I looked at the text. The easy thing would be to delete it, to maintain the hard boundary, to say too late. But the strong thing was to recognize that the cycle only breaks if someone refuses to pass on the pain. I typed a reply. The coach's name is Sarah. I will email you her contact. I will pay for 5 sessions. That is it. The rest is on you. I hit send. I watched the message turn blue. I put the phone down on the railing. I took a deep breath of the cold, salt air. I was alone in my penthouse. It was quiet. It was peaceful. And for the first time in 33 years, it was enough. Thank you for listening to My Parents Tried to Move My Sister into My New Luxury Penthouse, until they saw what I'd done. This story explored the difficult reality of setting boundaries with toxic family members and the immense courage it takes to break the cycle of financial and emotional manipulation. It is a reminder that no is a complete sentence, and that protecting your peace sometimes means walking alone. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever had to make a hard decision to protect your own space from family pressure? Please subscribe to the Revenge Stories channel for more tales of justice, boundaries, and reclaiming power. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I read every single one. Stay safe and stay strong.